Video piracy, mateys. Well, it's no laughing matter. Arr. I suppose there's something I could say. Something funny or cryptic that would tie it all together into one neat package. But I can't think of it. I was never very good with words. Sitting where I am, right here, right now, so close to the edge, if there's one thing I could tell you, it would be... no. It's something that can't be told. You won't understand till you're sitting where I'm sitting. Then you'll know. Maybe. Hell, even now, I don't know anything much about nothing. I guess all I really know, the one thing I can tell you for sure is this. In the end, you're gonna wish it was different. But that's okay. I really think it is. Last wishes. Let's not get into that. You know, I just want to thank everybody I owe. But I owe so much to so many people I wouldn't know where to begin. Not to mention all the stuff I stole. So just thank you. Thank you to everybody who was nice to me. Thank you to everybody who kicked my ass. You all helped me to get to where I'm going. And now that I'm almost there, I can honestly say, I'm ready. I really am. This world smashed me to lemon bits. There's nothing left of me but a vapor trail and an after-dinner mint.
The American poet Henry Rifle is dead. Or is he? It's been a year since he was last seen. His family hasn't heard from him, his enemies are still looking for him, and the truth, as ever, remains elusive. Did he pass one fateful night in some lonesome corner of the globe, as the legend goes? Or is he still out there somewhere, in a smoky coffee house, crafting more of those whimsical poems that made him famous? On this subject, opinions are evenly divided.
He's dead. I didn't know Henry, but I knew his soul. He was a good person, a good man. He wouldn't lie about something like that. If he says he's dead, he's dead.
Is he dead? I don't know. I hope so. The guy drove me nuts. He used to come in here every morning at exactly the same time for coffee. Said the same thing every day. He'd say to me, "How do you do, Splooshy-roo?" Couldn't stand him. The guy drove me crazy. I'm glad he's dead. What's everybody else saying?
Oh, I'm dead, no doubt about it. My monkey's dusted. Henry Rifle is dead. And to all the people out there who think I'm lying, let me just say this. I'm not.
If you ask me, the question isn't really whether Henry Rifle is dead. The question is, did Henry Rifle ever truly exist?
Henry Rifle was born Dan Hendrickson one cold winter day in 1970. In his own words, he was born at a time when everyone smoked a pipe and said things like tut tut.
You know, it's funny. Back when I was young, people often accused me of being naive and idealistic. Tut tut.
Some say he was born a poet. Others say it was a role he grew into. One thing was obvious from a very young age. This boy had ideas.
A little known fact. I was born in the lotus position. My mom never really forgave me for that.
From his humble beginnings, no one could have guessed he would grow up to be famous. In East Grand Forks, where the boy named Dan Hendrickson grew up and went to school, he was described as an average student. Quiet.
I would say I was a normal kid, just as normal as can be.
He was odd,
Strange.
very odd.
He graduated from high school in 1989, squarely in the middle of his class.
At that point, his life's journey had begun. He quickly established he wasn't one to follow the beaten path. As his classmates went off to college or the military, he stayed at home and went to the bowling alley.
I remember the day he told me he wanted to be a pro bowler. For a whole month, there wasn't a day I didn't cry.
He liked to bowl.
I remember the day he came in here. Nice looking kid. A little cocky maybe. But he told me what he wanted to do. And I agreed I'd be his mentor. But I told him one thing though. I couldn't do it for him. It had to come from in here. Things started out slowly. But eventually he began to improve. His averages started to go up. 115, 125, 135. But at 145, he hit the wall. It was like a fence he couldn't get over, which is not to say he didn't try. I mean, he was in here every day, 12 hours a day, every day, bowling, just bowling. He had some real talent, too. He saw the lane like very few bowlers do. If the Pepsi machine over in the corner wasn't working, or if somebody's kid's sister was stealing jujubes from her mom 4 lanes over, he knew about it. It's very few bowlers that have that gift, very few. Unfortunately, he didn't have the right stuff. He was killing himself trying to prove it. One night, just before closing, I sat him down and I said, listen, I got an idea. How about tomorrow you don't come around here? How about you stay home? Get some rest. Take a few days and make a life plan for yourself. Forget about bowling. It's a big world out there. You're a nice guy. Find something you like to do and do it. Doesn't that sound good? Doesn't that sound like a good idea? He looked down and he said, "You're right, Lou. I know you're right." Then he looked up at me and he said, "Hey, I got an idea. Why don't you go fuck yourself?" And that's when I threw the son of a bitch out on his ear. And I haven't heard from him since.
But fame was still a long ways away for Dan Hendrickson. His dreams of fame and fortune derailed. He enrolled at the University of North Dakota in the winter of 1990. 4 years later, he had his degree. For many people, college is about good times, parties, having sex with other people. Not for Dan Hendrickson.
College was a wild time for other people. For me, it was pretty boring. I remember it was like I was on the edge of the pool and everybody else was already in the pool, splashing around, having fun, but I didn't want to go in because the water was cold. Everybody else was having a great time. They were rocking, they were rollicking, they were frolicking. Everybody splashing around, naked as can be. Then when I finally got the nerve to strip down to the buff and jump in the pool, everybody was gone. And then they handed me my diploma.
Graduation surprised him. He really wasn't ready for the real world. I remember him telling me he was in hell of a bind. He was too young to retire, too old to join the circus. I said, "That's pretty funny. You should be a stand-up comedian." So I guess that's what he decided to do.
I never had a grand stopping vision as far as a career. I guess I mainly just wanted to stay out of the way. And if I could get a few laughs here or there along the way, so much the better.
Stand-up comedy, the cruelest of mistresses. In order to court her, Dan Hendrickson moved to the big city, Minneapolis, Minnesota, to pursue his dreams of fame and fortune. He started doing open mic nights around town. It didn't go well.
Hi everyone, my name's Dan. This is my first night as a stand-up comic. Thank you. Thank you very much. You know, to some people, comedy is a joke, but not to me. I take comedy very seriously. Anyway, so I didn't screw up too much. I wrote my act down on this piece of paper, so I wouldn't forget what I was saying. Forgive me, it's my first time trying this. And now, let's start the comedy show. Welcome to my deal. Thank you for coming out tonight and supporting live comedy. Be sure and tip your waitstaff, all right? They're working hard for you, so treat them okay. Any of you squares out there who aren't gonna tip, well, you should have just stayed home and watched the Jackie Gleason show. So while you're here, break out the leather, capiche? Boo! That's all I'm saying.
You suck!
The crowds didn't like me. It was like being in high school again. People ignoring me, throwing stuff at me, punching me in the kidneys. It was tough to take, so I just walked away. I just gave up stand-up comedy. Moved back home. It was tough for me to do. Comedy was my first love. I guess you could say I was kind of angry about it back then. This much. A little bit angry.
He was a lot angry about it back then. I got a letter from him around that time. I still have it. In that letter, I think is one of the very first poems he ever wrote. It's called 1996. I'll read it to you. As the years pile up behind me, like so much worthless junk, I begin to realize everything is bunk. People are such greedy pigs, I'd like to snap their necks like twigs. Like I said, angry.
Angry. It's a word a lot of people who knew him at that time in his life used to describe him.
Angry.
Angry. Angry. He was pissed.
I wouldn't say I was angry. I'd say I was a little uptight, frustrated, if you will. You gotta understand, the world's tough on a bald guy in his dreams. The world's like, the bald guy can stay, but the dreams gotta go.
He was getting really depressed, so a few of us suggested he take up golf. We thought it'd be good for him. Some fresh air, a little exercise. We thought it might relax him, calm him down a little bit. It was quite a display.
Had you ever seen anything like it?
Oh, sure. All the time. The only difference was this time, it was on a golf course.
As opposed to?
The supermarket, the mall, the post office.
The bar?
No. Dan actually always behaved himself at the bar. He was everywhere else, though. It's funny, what I remember about that evening on the golf course, how beautiful it was. The sun was shining, the birds were singing. But Dan was in such a dark place then, it was almost like the sun couldn't touch him. It couldn't get through. And then he just disappeared.
I heard he had a nervous breakdown. That's what I heard. I went to high school with Dan. Not many folks remember this, but in high school we voted him most likely to have a nervous breakdown. I hate to say we told you so, but we told you so. We also voted him most likely to be killed by villagers. I guess we missed on that one.
I don't know if I'd call it a nervous breakdown, that's what the doctors called it, but I look at it more as a black hole I happen to fall into. When you fall into a black hole, you think it's a terrible thing, and it is. You start to think you might never find your way out, but you do, of course. The only thing is, when you find your way out, it's not so much you anymore. You look the same, you even smell the same, but it's not you. Einstein didn't know everything about black holes. I mean, it's one thing to spend your days thinking about black holes, but to actually be in one is a different thing altogether. I'm not saying I was smarter than Einstein. There were and probably are a lot of people smarter than I am. But for the most part, they're cooped up in laboratories all day. I was out walking free.
It was a strange time. He just dropped that aside. No one knew where he was. Some said he was there, someone else heard he was there. But no one knew where he was, and no one knew quite what to make of it. Then one day I'm walking in downtown Grand Forks, near City Hall, and there's Dan, cool as can be, wearing these sunglasses and playing a harpsichord. I said, "Hey Dan, how's it going?" He says, "The name's Henry, friend, and I'm doing fine, thank you." He said, "Where have you been, man?" He breathes real deep and says, "I've been here all along, I think. And I'm pretty sure I'm here to stay." Then he says, "Well, enough about me. How's the moon?"
He was always fascinated by the moon, even as a little boy.
It was weird. We'd all be hanging out at a party or watching TV or whatever, and at some point during the night he'd look out the window and say, "Hey, look, it's the moon." Like it was some surprise or something.
My obsession with the moon is well documented.
When he reappeared, it was like Dan Henderson didn't exist anymore. He asked everyone to start calling him Henry Rifle. We all called him Henry anyway, so we figured, what the hell. At the time, none of us knew he was secretly planning to become a poet. Who could have ever guessed that?
You say you're writing your story. What is your story? Writing you. Is your story writing you?
A poet. Of all the things in the world I could be, I had to be a poet. You know, they say all poets must suffer. I'm glad.
We should have known. He was moderately intelligent, semi-literate. All of the signs were right there in front of us, just staring us in the face.
I put it all together about the time I was 26. I was down at the public library, and I absentmindedly jotted down a love sonnet. I looked down and said, "What the?" Then I leaned back in my chair and said, "Ah, shit."
I remember the day he told us. We didn't know what to say.
There were worse things to be. He could have been in a street gang.
The day he told us, I went and cleaned up his room. I figured it was just a matter of time before he'd be home again.
My parents were very supportive. Well, at first, my dad tried to talk me out of it. He was like, "Damn it, boy, use that thing in your shoulders. You don't want to be a poet. Poets go to bed hungry and wake up thirsty." Actually, I'm not sure my dad said that. It might have been the guy who lived down the street from us, but the fact remains.
When he first realized he was a poet, I think he felt kind of ashamed. I know I would have been.
I don't know if ashamed is quite the word, but I can tell you I wasn't proud. I mean, a poet. For the love of Pete. There was a time when being a poet was pretty cool, but that was back in the days of magic poets. Nowadays, poets floss daily and ride the bus. Where's the fun in that?
When we found out he was a poet, suddenly everything made sense. No one could have ever figured him out before that. He was always so odd. Playing with words, making up his own words, things like that.
Fabulon. Flipula. Lean angular. Those are mine.
I supported him. His cute little sunglasses, his cute little nickname, it was all very cute.
The reason I wore sunglasses was to remind people I was cool. They forgot sometimes.
And it wasn't just the sunglasses either. He started wearing the stupidest hats. They were idiotic. He even wrote about them in one of his poems. This one's called Honest. I like to wear stupid hats sometimes. Abe Lincoln did too, and look where it got him, dead in a box. I forget my point. Why the name change? Why not simply write poetry under his given name? It was a question he would find himself answering often.
Why did I become Henry Rifle? I suppose the macho thing to say would be that I was tired of pretending I was Clark Kent, but to me, Clark Kent is Superman. He's well groomed, he has a steady job. That's a lot to live up to. And Superman? Come on, be real. No, I suppose the real reason I became Henry Rifle is that he could open doors that Dan Hendrickson could not. Or maybe he was just a little bit better at picking locks.
It was sheer craziness. That's what it was. What kind of guy puts on sunglasses and pretends to be someone else? I'll tell you who. A complete loon, that's who. And you can quote me on that.
Oh, I suppose some people thought it was crazy, and maybe it was. On the other hand, we lived in an age of $4 ice cream cones and free trips to the moon. You tell me who was crazy.
Crazy or not, Henry Rifle's identity had been forever forged in the furnaces of pain. At last, he knew who he was, and moreover, where he was going. Now, all he had to do was figure out how he was going to get there.
Once I put everything together and accepted who I was, I realized all there was left to do was to put together a collection of poems. So, in East Grand Forks, Minnesota, there's this great bar called the Blue Moose. They have this beautiful deck that overlooks the river. So in the summer of '98, all I really did was sat on the deck, drank beer, watched the river, and wrote poems. It was nice. The waitstaff really took to me.
Yeah, I remember him. He was a nice enough guy and a pretty decent poet. Not much of a tipper, though.
It was a great time in my life. I just felt like this dam had burst inside of me, and suddenly everything that was inside was free to flow out all over the place.
The collection of poems he was working on became Tourniquet Smile, a book he published himself. It was released to the public without much fanfare. It was the first shot from a poet named after a Civil War-era gun. To some, it was a dead-on bullseye.
I was a fan of Henry's right from the start. His poetry really spoke to me. It was funny and sad, and honest and true.
Well, what I liked about it was how weird it was, I guess. Finally, I could point to someone and say, this guy's more messed up than the rest of us. His screwed up perspective was truly refreshing.
To others, it was not.
I didn't much care for his poetry. Nope. Not at all.
I never understood his poems. Were they supposed to be funny or sad? Who was that Henry Rifle person? What type of person was he? Do you know?
Sometime after the Tourniquet Smile was published, he described it as a love letter from hell. I could see that. That made sense to me. Emotionally back then, he was very cut off, isolated, but he had a song in his heart.
Which song?
The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Tourniquet Smile was a very minor hit. It sold 200 copies at coffee houses and through word of mouth. It might have sold even more, perhaps 400 or even 500 copies, but he neglected to put barcodes on the copies of his books, and as a result, local bookstores wouldn't carry them.
I didn't have much business sense when I started out, or any. I wasn't a detail person. I wasn't the kind of guy who was going to go down to the lumberyard to buy a toothpick. I rarely went to lumberyards. Oh, that wood made me nervous.
If nothing else, the book introduced Henry Rifle to the world and got him back in the spotlight. It was a far different person who took the stage now. The difference was immediate and obvious.
It was very liberating taking the stage as Henry Rifle. For the first time in my life, I didn't have to be me. It was great. Hi, I'm Henry Rifle. Welcome to my meal. Let's just get started. I'm freaking out. On the surface, I might look quite calm, but inside I'm freaking out. So let's just get rolling here, okay? I'm an experimental poet. I think I should tell you that I'm an experimental poet.
I'd like you.
Why am I doing this?
He kind of came into his own on stage. It was impressive. And even people who didn't like him wound up liking him. Well, on stage at least.
Even so, Henry Rifle had his critics.
Henry's influences were extremely obvious. Richard Brodigan, Charles Bukowski, E.E. Cummings, Robert Frost. He stole from all of them.
Mr. Rifle, some people say your work is derivative. They say your poetry is nothing but recycled Brodigan and Bukowski, pre-recorded feedback, chopped up, remixed, and fed into a giant oscillator, regurgitated, reconfigured, and served cold. How do you respond?
Well, just to be mentioned in the same breath as my heroes, Richard Brodigan and Charles Bukowski, it's an honor.
Do you think Henry Rifle stole his style?
People say he stole his style. I don't know. He may have borrowed a few things, but his voice was his and it was his alone. It did belong to him.
To Henry or to Dan?
I don't know. I could never keep it straight.
Say what you will about his readings, but they were very popular. His books were very popular. I wouldn't be surprised if he had about 30 people at his readings. If you counted the walk-in traffic and watched throughout the night.
At the end of his shows, he came up with some classic sign-offs. Every night he'd close with 1 or 2 lines. It hardly ever varied.
Thank you for laughing at my pain. I hate you all. Good night. Thank you, it was nothing. Broadway, here I come.
Broadway. It must have seemed a long ways away from Grand Forks, North Dakota. But little did Henry Rifle know that he would very soon be walking along that fabled street, Broadway Avenue, in Fargo, North Dakota. Henry Rifle moved here in the fall of 1999. Shortly after his arrival, he published his second book. At the time, he said the decision to write another book was an easy one.
After I wrote the first book, I pretty much just threw it out there and said, here it is, and dove for cover. It's a big thing to do. I mean, it's like putting yourself at the mercy of the world, which we all know is the most merciless place in the universe. But no one said boo. A few people said they liked it. A few more even said they loved it. It was validation. For the first time in my life, people agreed with what I was doing. But I was so insecure that if even one person would have said that they hated it, I would have given up writing, just like that.
I knew I should have said something.
The title of his second book was Hitman Precise. It was less rough than Tourniquet Smile, more sure. It was the work of an artist slowly coming into his own. And though popular with the general public, at least one review was highly critical.
The Fargo Forum ripped that book, tore it to shreds. They said the only thing worse than my poetry was my taste in hats, if you can imagine. It was a rough welcome to Fargo. I mean, the Forum is to Fargo what the Times is to London. When they diss you, you know you've been dissed. Even now, after all these years, I still can't begin to express my disappointment. Although I guess this is a start.
Despite the harsh welcome, Fargo took to the rough and tumble poet. Hitman Precise sold over 400 copies. His readings were quite popular with the young underground hipster crowd. He was even getting interviews on local talk shows.
So tell me, who exactly is Henry Rifle?
He's this guy who wears sunglasses and writes poems. But I'm no bubblegum machine, Daddy-o. Get that straight.
Oh, okay. That's interesting. Now, how would you describe yourself in 5 words or less?
5 words? That's not many words. Dark, complicated, troubled. A genius.
Genius. It was a word that Henry Rifle struggled with always. It was a word that came up again and again throughout his short career.
So Henry, views on you are divided. Some say you're an idiot, others say you're a genius. What about you? Would you say it's fair to call you a genius?
Oh, I don't know, Cindy. Is anything in life ever really fair? I'm kidding. Of course you can call me a genius. I'd be hurt if you didn't.
I think moving to Fargo was good for him. It allowed him to go off in a more experimental direction. Even then, I don't think he knew what kind of poet he wanted to be. Fargo gave him a chance to try on some different hats.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to introduce to you tonight the mountain poet, Henry Rifle. Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you the longshore poet, Henry Rifle.
Finally, he came up with a persona that seemed to fit just right.
Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the lounge poet, Henry Rifle.
The lounge poet. It was perfect. Fit him to a T. Right after they came up with that is when they came up with his signature introduction.
Who?
They.
It is my great pleasure to introduce to you tonight a truly great poet. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the stoned genius, Henry Rifle.
That whole introduction thing started as a joke and then somehow it stuck. I wasn't stoned. I was never stoned. Only don't be smoked doobies.
The stoned genius of Henry Rifle. It was just an introduction? So he wasn't stoned?
Who, Henry? No. The guy was a straight arrow. Straight from the word go. Terrifyingly straight.
But you agree he was a genius.
Henry? Nah. You have to understand it was show business. I did what they told me. They handed me the paper. I read it.
Who?
They.
Everything seemed to be going well for Henry Rifle. His books were selling well, and people were coming to his shows. It all seemed too good to be true. It was.
The thing you have to understand about Henry is that he had no life off stage. On stage, the guy was charming, witty. Off stage, the guy was a freak.
He was shy, painfully shy. He made J.D. Salinger look sociable. He was a shadow, a ghost, an unlisted number. When he wasn't performing or going out for coffee by himself, he hardly ever left his apartment. And then all he'd do was sit home and complain about how he never met new people.
I was never very good at making connections, cause and effect, this kind of thing.
He was never there. Even when he was there, he wasn't there. He'd retreat into his mind. He liked to spend a lot of time up there in that haunted attic he liked to call a brain.
Now, Henry, some of your friends told us that you're never really where you are. You tend to drift off into a dreamlike state to get away, to escape.
That's true. I tend to do that.
Are you here with us today, right now?
Honestly?
Yes.
I'm afraid not.
So where are you right now?
Sitting in an outdoor cafe in Argentina, sipping a glass of iced tea.
Well, how is it?
Too sweet.
I guess it was a defense mechanism of sorts, always needing to be somewhere else, never being happy where I was. I had all sorts of defense mechanisms. My head was like a medieval castle. I remember sometimes I would leave a room before entering it, strictly for kicks, mind you.
I guess the first time I realized that something was wrong was the winter of 2000. He made this snowman. A really nice snowman. He named it after Robert Frost, the poet. He took really good care of the snowman. He'd go out there and repack the snow every day. He'd straighten the hat, adjust the buttons, and every week he'd bring out a fresh carrot for the nose. That snowman was like a baby to him. And then spring came, and on the very first warm day, I saw him talking to the snowman.
What was he saying?
He said, "You're not so hot now, are you, Frost? Huh? Who's the greatest poet in the world now?" It was easily one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen.
Yeah, the snowman. People made a big deal of that. It wasn't that big a deal. It was just a little joke, that's all. Friendly competition. You know, if Frost couldn't stand the heat, maybe he should have stayed out of the kitchen.
You have to understand, even though he was suddenly Mr. Popular, underneath, nothing had changed. He was still the same insecure, lonely guy he'd always been. Isolated, alone. So even though he was suddenly the toast of the town, underneath, nothing had changed.
His whole life was based on rejection. Rejection was what drove him. Rejection was what made him the person that he was. And now that everybody was accepting him, he didn't know what to do. It confused him. He was like a dancer who couldn't hear the music anymore.
Financially, too, he was feeling the heat. There wasn't a lot of money in being a poet. He had friends with regular jobs, and they were starting to make good money. They were starting to buy cars, homes, radar ranges. Not Henry, it frustrated him, too. He used to complain to me about it. He'd say, I can't even afford to buy a goddamn lawnmower. I'd say, Henry, you don't even have a lawn. He'd say, damn it, that's not the point. There's no talking to him when he was like that.
He didn't seem happy to me. Off stage, he hardly ever smiled. So one day I asked him, I said, Henry, what's the matter? You don't seem happy. And he just snapped and said, what are you talking about? Well, I'm as happy as the 4th of July. He didn't really seem happy to me, though.
You could see it coming a mile away. The guy was gonna snap. He was a nutball. A first-class, grade A nutball. He always was. You can quote me.
You mother, I will kill you! One beautiful morning that spring, Henry Rifle went out for a walk. He told no one where he was going. As the day went on and there was no sign or word from him, his friends and family grew more and more uneasy. By that evening, when he hadn't returned, everyone's worst fears were confirmed. Once again, Henry Rifle was gone.
You can put on sunglasses, change your clothes, change towns, do everything you can to build a new life. But if what you build upon is a house of cards, sooner or later everything's going to come tumbling down.
He was having an identity crisis, plain and simple. He didn't know who he was or who he wanted to be. He was a very confused young man.
I just told him to pick someone and be that person. I didn't care if it was Dan or that Henry guy. Just be somebody, anybody.
When I disappeared again, all the crazy rumors came out again. You know, he's nuts. He's crazy. He's completely insane.
I saw him during the time he was missing. I'll never forget it. Never.
What happened?
He flew.
What do you mean, he flew?
Like a bird. He flew. He did. I seen him.
Years later, Henry discussed all the rumors surrounding his disappearance.
There were a lot of rumors going around right then, and like most rumors, not many of them are true.
So the rumors that you can fly?
Patently untrue. Ridiculous. Retroactive poppycock.
How about the rumor that you can breathe underwater?
Well, that's an entirely separate jar of pickles.
Henry would never say where he went during that time or what he was doing. When asked, he would only provide vague clues.
Everybody makes more of it than it really was. There isn't much to tell. Basically, I was at a point in my life where what I needed to do was take all the sound out of my life before slowly bringing it back in. And that's what I did. I took all the sound out of my life. Well, except for the sound of my electronic drum machine. I could never get rid of that baby.
What mattered, though, is that when he came back, he was ready to take his writing to a new level. He returned with a renewed focus. His commitment to poetry deepened, his pursuit of fame intensified.
Afterwards, he credited his friends and family for sticking with him and giving him the courage he needed to break out of his shell, for a brief time. At least until an even bigger shell formed around him yet again. I digress.
My friends and family were amazing. They were instrumental in bringing me back to life, and better than ever. The support was incredible. Everybody was like, "You can do it. You're the best. Ah, booga booga." So I got off my dead butt and went back to work.
Go back to work he did, writing a new book in just over a month. It was the book that would change his life forever. Released deep in the winter of 2002, Sweetheart Guitar was an overnight sensation. It was a book unlike his earlier efforts. It was a work that was both mature and immature, grown-up and childlike, serious and not serious. But this book had much broader appeal, both locally and nationally. This book got people talking, and nobody was on the fence. Everyone who read it had something to say about it.
I describe Sweetheart Guitar the same way I describe Henry himself. A whole bunch of strange in one place.
Tourniquet Smile was like an elaborate toy boat. Hitman Precise was more like a raft. Bigger, sturdier, more stable. Sweetheart Guitar was more like a rocket ship, and it took him to the stars.
Sweetheart Guitar was like a national wake-up call. It froze everyone in their tracks. For the first time in a long time, it made everyone stop and look around and ask where we were and how we got there, and most importantly, had we gone too far. It was a rum punch to our collective coconut mix. It also marked the first time Henry Rifle's poetry branched into politics.
You see, he went off and got all political. He wrote this one poem called Politics as Usual. There's this cat who lives down the street from me. He's a radical cat. He licks his butt. Politics as usual.
Yeah, some folks were unhappy about that. Some even said my political poems were un-American, which I think is ridiculous. If you ask me, it's un-American to call anybody else un-American, even people from other states. Besides, I was as American as a red barn. Maybe more so.
His political views notwithstanding, the book became a regional hit, and eventually it found its way into the right hands in Los Angeles.
Hey, my name's Mike, mechanic here in LA. Have been my whole life. One day I get this book from this guy named Henry Rifle. I decide I'll read it. Wasn't that bad. And I thought, why'd he send this to me? I have a sister in the publishing industry, so I sent it to her. Everything worked out just fine.
His book was picked up and published by a major American publishing house. Overnight, he went from being a local curiosity to a national figure, from being stone broke to being financially well off. The results were predictable. Henry Rifle freaked out.
You know how cockroaches run when the lights come on? That's pretty much how it was with Henry when he became famous.
It was wild. I felt like a blur, thrown into focus. After 30 years of nobody listening to me, suddenly everybody was listening to me. And not only listening, they actually wanted to hear what I had to say. It was very troubling. I remember being troubled by it.
He freaked out. He couldn't handle the attention, so he just moved up to Canada one day and showed up at our doorstep.
He moved into the guest bedroom, and he spent most of his time under the bed. We never saw him during the day. He only came out at night.
Yeah, we put out some food for him each evening and a glass of water, sometimes milk. He didn't eat much.
And how long did this go on?
For about a month. And then eventually he came to terms with his fame and he moved back out on his own.
Yeah. The house seemed kind of empty without him, though, once he left. We kind of got used to taking care of something, so we decided to have a baby.
We named him Henry.
There was a lot of strife and tumult going on in my life back then. It took a lot of getting used to. And then suddenly I had this moment of clarity and I just knew everything was going to be okay. It took a lot of getting used to, though. The fame, For years, all I could do was afford the occasional cheap cigar, and suddenly I could buy all the cheap cigars I wanted. That was nice. I thought it would change other aspects of my life, but really, it didn't. For a while, I thought being famous would help me get some of my phone calls returned. I was wrong about that one.
Being a poet is like being a camp counselor. The readers are like your kids. Sometimes you sneak up behind them and push them in the water when they're not expecting it. Other times you take them out in the woods and leave them in the middle of nowhere and let them find their own way home. And other times you gather everyone together and roast marshmallows. Those are the best times. To me, being a poet is like being a pitcher. You have to keep the hitters off balance, and the readers are your hitters. When they're expecting a fastball,
It was a good time in the life of Henry Rifle. Many evenings you could find him somewhere on the cable dial talking about his craft.
They crowd the plate. You gotta pitch inside of them. Go straight for their heads. To me, being a poet is a lot like being a coal miner. You don't know what's down in that mine. Most days, you don't want to know. All you really know is that, at the end of the day, you're gonna come out dirty.
With the book climbing the bestseller charts, most authors would go out on a book signing tour. Henry Rifle chose not to go down that road.
I didn't see the point in a book tour. I liked to travel, but I didn't like crowds, so what we did is we sent a cardboard cutout of myself out on the road in place of me. People didn't seem to notice the difference, or if they did, they didn't say.
Instead, he took a trip out to Hollywood, California to evaluate his options.
There was a definite buzz on this guy. Everybody loved him. Producers, directors, you name it. They'd all be whining and dining him, but it was funny. It was like he just didn't care. He'd be out at dinner with some bigwig, and he'd be like, "A golden opportunity, eh? Hey, pass the ketchup." Or, "We'll make a lot of money? Hey, that's great. How about some fettuccine?" I mean, it was really annoying. All he really seemed to care about was the free meals.
The very first night I stayed in Hollywood, at the Chateau Marmont, a very famous place, I knew for the first time in my life I was right where I needed to be. That night, I slept like a ghost in a dead man's dream.
As usual, he was quick to snag an on-air appearance.
Hey, Hollywood, great news. I got a hotshot poet in the studio with us today. Maybe you've read his book. It's called Sweetheart Guitar. Ladies and gentlemen, pleased to introduce to you Mr. Henry Rifle.
Hello, Hollyweird.
Hey, Henry, what have you been doing to keep busy out here in La La Land?
Well, last night I hung out with J-Lo for a while, and then I went up to a party in the Hollywood Hills.
Really?
No, I don't go to parties. Who's J-Lo?
He must have liked what they had to say out there, because the next thing you know, he moved out to Hollywood and he bought himself a bungalow.
Bungalow. That's just a fun word to say.
It was a modest bungalow, a bungalow that suited him. And shortly after he made the move to Hollywood, Henry Rifle had his own TV show.
The show was called Beat Cop, and the premise was he was a beat poet who moonlighted as a big city cop. A cop who isn't afraid to break the rules. His tagline was, when he's not busting crime, he's out busting rhymes.
It sounded like a great opportunity to me. I have a lot of respect for the police. And it just sounded like fun. A chance to play a role with some authority. Someone people look up to. The fuzz. The heat. The stick. The man.
They made a pilot, and that was as far as it went. It got kind of an underground cult following, though. You know, it was a concept show. The concept was this hippie cop. He was a hippie. He wasn't tough. Everyone knew he wasn't tough, but for whatever reason, he acted tough.
Here's the deal, punk. You admit to stealing those radial tires, I won't have to beat you to within a stone inch of your life. Take it or leave it. I mean it, amigo. I'll beat the dog poop out of you.
It was no 21 Jump Street, but it was a decent cop show as they go. It could have been a hit, but the network executives, they just didn't see it that way. I felt real bad for the kid. He took it real hard.
I should have known better. The first rule every actor learns is never get too attached to a project. But I did. I thought Beat Cop had potential. But then I thought, there'll be other opportunities. That's when I came up with the idea for Bungalow Cam.
Bungalow Cam was a very bad idea at the wrong time. Basically, Henry decided to put a camera in his bungalow and record his daily life. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. The problem was, there wasn't much going on in his life at that time. The TV show wasn't picked up, he wasn't doing much writing. He was basically a modern-day hermit, stuck in his apartment. He really had no social life. He called me one day, told me he's gonna buy one of those fancy water coolers with the paper cups. Thought it might add a little life to his place. Let me tell you, it didn't work.
After Henry went away, I came into all those Bungalow Cam tapes, and I've been through every one of them. Let me tell you, it's a comedic gold mine. He always said he was the funniest when he was by himself. He was right. The effect that Bungalow Cam had on Henry is really amazing to watch. It was a natural progression. At first, he really likes the idea. He's having a lot of fun with it.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
At first, it was like the camera was his friend. Then the reality of it started to sink in. It's not easy living your life on camera. You're never alone, even when you're alone. Didn't help that he was going through another dry spell about then.
Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. Nobody likes me, everybody hates me. Nobody likes me.
Eventually the camera kind of stopped being his friend.
What? What? Don't look at me that way, okay? I'm entitled to a private life too, okay? Just turn the camera off. That's all I'm asking. Respect my wishes, okay? Just turn the... We're done talking about this, okay? I'm going to bed. We're done.
Then, finally, he just snapped. Snapped completely.
What are you looking at? What are you looking at?
So there it is in black and white. I've got all the footage. Over 200 hours worth of freaky entertainment.
What are you going to do with them?
I don't know. I was thinking of putting together some sort of an after-school special. You know, something to scare the kids, keep them on the straight and narrow.
The Bungalow Cam was a really bad idea, looking back, but it taught me something. It taught me you can't take things for granted, especially friendships. So what I did after pulling myself back together again was invited some old friends from back home out to the coast. I flew them out on my dime. It was very generous of me to do, I thought.
So he flew a few of us out there, his good friends. He had a limo pick us up at the airport and take us to his bungalow. Once we got inside, he hugged us, told us all how important we are to him, how we could never be replaced. Not by fame, not by fortune, not by anything.
We told him we thought he'd forgot about all of us. He said, "Are you crazy? You guys are like the number 8. I couldn't forget about you.
He was tearing up, getting pretty emotional about it.
Wussy.
Yeah, so we're sitting there, the phone rings, picks it up, says something like, sure, sounds great. I'll see you then. Hangs up the phone, looks at us and says, all right, beat it, you stiffs. Kenny Rogers coming over. Jackass.
We all wanted to kick his ass. He called us at the Motel 6 the next day that he had stashed us in, and he was all apologies. He said, hey fellas, listen, it was the gambler. I mean, come on, it was Kenny Rogers. We couldn't argue with that. So he paid us back by taking us out for a fancy dinner. We talked about old times. That was all right. About a week later, we were back home, and we heard he met this girl.
Gina. She wasn't just a girl. She was a woman.
Sure, I dated Henry Rifle. I figured, why not?
She was Gina Mona Lisa Alexander, an aspiring actress. They met at a Hollywood premiere and fell madly in love. Theirs was a doomed romance, however. And what Henry didn't know is that their love would lead to the end of his career in Hollywood and perhaps the end of his very life.
I didn't see it coming. You never do. If you did, you'd duck or roll out of the way. Fellas, take my advice. If the good Lord ever puts a beautiful woman in your path, check for cross traffic.
It wasn't much of a love affair. Between you and me, making love to him was like making love to a drowning man in the pouring rain. You just wanted to hold his head underwater until he stopped struggling. But he was nice enough, so I stuck around. Then one day, I told him I didn't want to be an actress anymore. I wanted to be a nurse. And then he broke up with me, right then and there, on the spot.
I only dated actresses. It was that simple. I had rules, you know, like never trust a left-handed poet. Nothing personal. It was just a rule of mine that didn't rhyme. Oh wait, I guess it does.
What happened next was the beginning of the end for Henry Rifle.
I was devastated. I left that night in tears. About a week later, I went back to his bungalow to pick up some things of mine. And there he was, on the couch. And he was what? He was measuring his wiener.
It was a devastating charge, a charge Henry would deny until the very end.
I wasn't measuring my wiener, okay?
He was totally measuring his wiener.
I'm a scientist.
He took a science class in college. He got a C-.
I never said I was a great scientist. Next question. Next question.
The news spread like wildfire. The tabloids picked it up. Gossip columns, Entertainment Tonight. It was big news.
It was pretty much the end of his career. Overnight he went from being Henry Rifle the poet to Henry Rifle, the guy who got caught measuring his wiener.
Like they had for so many before him, the bright lights of Hollywood had faded to black. The glitter turned to dust. Before long, he would vanish, and all that would be left were questions. Questions that may never be answered.
One day, he was just gone. No phone call, nothing. I went over to his bungalow to see what was going on. The place was completely empty. All that was left was some unlabeled video cassettes and these.
At first, I thought it was more of the bungalow camp tapes when he flipped his gourd, but after watching the first one, I could see that it was a lot more than that. What I saw was a man who'd been pushed to his extreme outer limits. It was out of focus, it was distorted, very avant-garde.
And what was on the rest of the tapes?
A little bit of everything. Gardening tips, general interest stuff.
We decided to play that first tape back.
Where do you go when everything's gone? I've been asking myself that for the longest time.
And from there, it only gets weirder.
I saw the whole thing on the internet. I heard the reason it was so out of focus is because Henry turned into a giant fly. That's what I heard.
The tape, as it was found, was very disturbing. The dialogue largely unintelligible. But the words that can be made out are chilling indeed.
Never could see any other way, never could see any other way, never could see any other. No, I am your father.
So we took the tape to a video restoration lab for expert analysis. The technicians there made a rather surprising discovery.
Well, the problem was that he recorded over a tape of Gilligan's Island. He must have taped it at some point. The quality of this tape is very poor at best, but using state-of-the-art techniques and splicing, we were able to restore pretty much the entire tape. Have a look. I'm sorry, wrong tape. Here we go.
What the tape contained was Henry Rifle's farewell address. The scandal, the pressures of fame, and the inherent fault lines that ran down to his very soul conspired to break him down one final time. The contents of the tape came as a surprise. You've seen pieces of it, and you'll see the rest of it soon. But in an interview Henry gave shortly before his disappearance, announcing his retirement from poetry, we see clearly a worn-out young man. We see the face of a man who has already said his goodbyes.
So Henry, tell me, how are you holding up?
I've been better.
That whole wiener measuring scandal, have you been able to put it behind you?
Not so much.
What's next then for old Henry Rifle?
Henry Rifle is dead.
Are you saying there will be no more poems? No more books?
Well, there'll be poems and books. They just won't be written by me.
If what you're saying is true, then the question has to be asked. How will Henry Rifle be remembered?
Besides the wiener measuring scandal? Oh, I don't know. After all, why would anybody remember me? What was I but a graveyard poet who arrived at the party far too late and was forced to leave far too soon? I'm sorry, what was the question?
And just like that, Henry Rifle was gone. He has never been seen since.
Every day I think I'm going to see him walk through that door and ask for a bologna sandwich and a glass of fresh squeezed lemonade. But he never does.
Henry Rifle, he's down the road. Poof! It's magic. It's gone.
Henry Rifle? He's dead, isn't he? I really gotta take this. Hello?
What I remember about Henry was his giving personality. He was such a generous person.
He owes me $5.
He was forever at war with himself. Wherever he is now, I just hope he's finally at peace. But I doubt it.
What I'll remember about Henry is that he didn't give up. He had heart. Damn it, grit. He was one gritty son of a bitch.
I remember I used to like to get up late at night and make myself peanut butter toast with lots and lots of peanut butter. This is getting weird, isn't it?
What a strange trip it was for a young man named Dan Hendrickson, who became a nationally known author named Henry Rifle, who rose to the very top and sunk to the deepest bottom. Here now is that final videotape he made. Here now is Henry Rifle, one last time, in his own words.
Where do you go when everything's gone? I've been asking myself that for the longest time. Henry Rifle is dead. He never existed. Henry Rifle was a dummy corporation invented by a fool. He could say things I couldn't. Better. Sometimes they rhymed. Why not be a poet? But I'm not naive enough to think I was the greatest poet ever. There was some better than me. Longfellow, Robert Frost. Look, there isn't much time to say what needs to be said. To all you kids out there, I want you to know everything I did was for you. Whether I was drinking a beer or ordering a pizza, it was for you. Look, I know there's nothing to say. It's obvious. So why waste time talking about it? Get in there and mingle, all right? You'll be glad you did. I know I'm not going to be here anymore for you, but if you really need me, just close your eyes and I'll be there. I won't really be there, but you can pretend. It's easy. That's about it for me. But don't worry. Sitting here now at the end of the day, I'm comfortable to say I schlooped a lot of bee. Sloop a lot of bee! Sloop a lot of bee! If you're going to remember me at all I ask is that you remember me as the rarest of poets, the poet who could hit the open jump shot. That's all I ask. I suppose there's something I could say, something funny or cryptic that would tie it all together, but I can't think of it. I was never very good with words.
And so the story ends. Or does it? As with many famous celebrities who have disappeared, there continue to be Henry Rifle sightings. Some say he's still alive, living out his days quietly as a deranged woodsman in the North Country. Others say he's an over-the-road trucker delivering goods all across this great nation of ours. Some people just don't care. For those of us who do care, one question remains: whether or not we'll ever see that star-crossed poet again. Perhaps, perhaps not. But one thing's for certain: we'll never stop looking.
Attempt to capture you.